Every day, the news brings more and more images of random violence, torture, and sexual aggression right into our living rooms. Violence and violent images permeate more and more aspects of our lives. And I think it's time to draw the line.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Ronnie Ersenbach, and this is the Band Media Podcast, where we will be talking about the art that crossed that line. So, there may have been occasion, though seldom, where I have let go just a smidgen of, shall we say, lighthearted, good-natured ribbing at true crime podcasts. Now, to be completely honest with you, dearest listeners, friends, if I may be so bold, I actually really like true crime stuff. Don't Fuck with Cats on Netflix blew me away, even if I did have to close my eyes through parts. And in the podcast world, I absolutely adore Morbid and the two young women who bring it to us. Despite the fact I've been known to have one or two along the way, I'm in fact no psychiatrist. I can't really say what or why we humans are like that. This kind of almost universal fascination with real-life death. Which, by the way, real-life death would be a perfect name for a true crime podcast, but I digress. But I can't deny that it's there. That deep down lizard brain urge to turn your neck toward the car accident on the side of the road rather than away. I think true crime helps us scratch that itch. While the genre has always flourished in books and magazines, fun fact, between 1550 and 1700, there was a gigantic explosion in the production of true crime publications, usually in the form of leaflets or pamphlets. This was due to a combination of the rise of literacy rates coupled with new printing technology. The formula was simple: write about violent cases where the killer gets caught. Though based on true stories, these often read as morality plays. Sin causes punishment. Over in China, towards the end of the Ming Dynasty, round about 1617, the Book of Swindles by Zhang Yingyu was published. Though it should be noted that that was not the original title. The original title was A Book for Foiling Swindlers Based on Worldly Experience, which was a collection of short stories of cases of fraud. Now, even though these stories take a look at just exactly how the nasty perpetrators of these crimes accomplished their deceptions, the stated purpose of the book was to avoid getting swindled yourself and not to show one how to perpetrate these crimes. Although some historians believe this may be the equivalent of a headshot putting a tobacco use only sign on a water bong, or Q-tips having a warning against placing them in your ear. In film and television, we would see the real explosion of real-life crime over the last decade or so, accompanied by the True Crime Podcast and the never-to-be-overlooked docuseries. Though there was a bit of a precursor. That precursor was the Based on a True Story film. That's right, friends. Based on a True Story isn't just for inspirational tales of Jamaican bobsled teams or horses that are really good at racing or something. It has been a long-standing trope in the horror, thriller, and crime film genres. Hell, Ed Gein alone was inspiration for Norman Bates from Psycho, Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, Edric Cobb from Deranged, and most importantly, for our purposes, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The film that starts out, quote, "The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths, in particular Sally Hardesty and her invalid brother Franklin. It is all the more tragic in that they were young. But had they lived very, very long lives, they could not have expected, nor would they have wished to see as much of the mad and macabre as they were to see that day. For them, an idyllic summer afternoon drive became a nightmare. The events of that day were to lead to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre." End quote. Which, fun fact, was narrated by an uncredited, then disc jockey, John Larroquette. But if you know anything about these flicks and the characters contained therein, you're pretty aware that they are nothing alike. Hell, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is actually about a family of maniacs instead of just one man. But before we get into just what this one man did, I think it's about time that we get into this episode's trigger warnings. And I have to admit, this one is a bit of a doozy. We will be talking about real-life incidents of murder, necrophilia, sexual violence, rape, and dismemberment. Some of it directed at a 6-year-old child. There's not really a graceful way to segue back out of that warning, so let's just hop back into it. So who was this Ed Gein guy? The long and short of it was, Gein was a guy with a pretty messed up relationship with his mother. After she passed away, he began grave robbing. Eventually, he would work his way up to murder, having only 2 confirmed cases, but being suspected of 7. It was while being investigated for one of these murders that authorities would place him under arrest and investigate his house and the farm he lived on. It was there that the world would come to find out what Ed Gein had really been up to at his farm. Not only did they find the woman they were looking for with her head cut off and her body hung upside down and had her insides removed as a hunter would gut a deer, but also there's what had been done to the bodies that he robbed from the graves. Skulls used as decoration and as bowls, a belt made of human nipples, and several items made out of human skin. Should be noted that this is by no way an entire list of what they found. It was a complete horror show. But while you can definitely see the connections between the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Ed Gein, I would argue that there are 3 essential elements to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and none of them were referenced in the Ed Gein case. While the first 2 murders were horrific, a massacre it does not make. Second, Gein used a hunting rifle. I don't know if he even owned a chainsaw. And third, he was from Wisconsin, not Texas. For what it's worth, the most accurate film depiction of Gein, in my humble opinion, is the criminally underrated film 1974's Deranged, aka Deranged Confessions of a Necrophile, which I think even surpasses the 2000 biopic of Ed Gein, directed by Chuck Perrello, a name we will circle back around to later. 1996 brought us another one of the infamous based on a true story films. That is the Academy Award-winning, and pretty much everything else award-winning, Fargo. Though to have the film tell it, it was much more than based on a true story. As the opening text reads, quote, "This is a true story. The events depicted in this film took place in Minnesota in 1987. At the request of the survivors, the names have been changed. Out of respect for the dead, the rest has been told exactly as it occurred." End quote. It was that claim that led police departments all over Minnesota being flooded with tips regarding the events that happened in the film. The Coen brothers would later admit that the claim at the beginning of the film was completely fictitious. But that same year, 1996, marked the death of Otis Toole, who died at the age of 49 of cirrhosis at the Florida State Prison. Toole was a very real serial killer. Before he died, he had confessed to nearly 100 murders. Among them, the infamous murder of Adam Walsh. Adam Walsh was kidnapped from a Sears on July 27, 1981. He was strangled to death with a safety belt, and his severed head was found in a drainage ditch 130 miles away 2 weeks later. Adam's father, John Walsh, made certain that his son's disappearance became national news in hopes of finding him. After he discovered Adam's horrifying fate, he dedicated his life to victims' rights, protecting children from being abducted, and finding missing children. This includes the film Adam, which was based on his son's abduction and aired on NBC in 1983, 1984, and 1985. Each time it was aired with pictures of missing children at the end and a hotline number viewers could call if they had any information on them. This was actually credited with finding 13 of the 55 children shown. Fun fact, among those children found was Brian Anthony McCain II, who had been kidnapped along with his 2 sisters by his mother's boyfriend and held captive for over 2 years. It was his babysitter that saw his picture after a viewing of Adam and reported it to the police, eventually leading to Brian being returned to his mother. Young Brian would grow up to become better known by his stage name, Busy Bone, of the rap group Bone Thugs-n-Harmony. John Walsh himself became most well known for being the host of the TV program America's Most Wanted, and then a slew of Catch a Predator type shows after that show was canceled in 2011, making an astonishing 24-season run. It should be noted that while I hopefully never have to go through what John Walsh has been through, it has been argued, and reasonably so, that his impact has not been without its downsides, in addition to a few personal controversies. The most notable is probably kickstarting the 1980s hysteria of stranger danger, a craze that is still around today and makes parents more terrified of admittedly atrocious, but statistically very unlikely things than the more mundane dangers of everyday life. This can lead to all kinds of things, from mental exhaustion on the part of the parents to a reduced feeling of independence in adolescence. But, like I stated before, I'm no psychiatrist, just your humble rogue scholar of smut, and I'm already taking a teensy step outside my lane this episode to talk about 3 serial killers. Speaking of which, that brings us to serial killer number 3, a known friend, fellow traveler, and presumed sometimes lover of Otis Toole, none other than Henry Lee Lucas. Otis Toole's confession to nearly 100 murders paled in comparison to Henry Lee Lucas's claim of having committed over 600 murders across the whole of the United States. It was a staggering, unbelievable trail of unabashed brutality. 2 real-life boogeymen who, both together and apart, had been taking the lives of seemingly countless innocent people of all ages under our noses, undetected for years. And it was an episode of 2020, of all things, that brought the prolific serial killers to the attention of young filmmaker John McNaughton. McNaughton had already had a couple of direct-to-video documentaries called Dealers in Death under his belt. They were small docs put together with public domain footage and voiceover about the gangsters of the early 20th century and the impact they had on pop culture. The videos did okay. So the executive producers who hired McNaughton on, Malik B. Ali and Waleed B. Ali, of a company called Maljack, later MPI, decided to give him another shot, this time with a documentary about wrestling. It was in a meeting with Waleed that McNaughton had learned that the folks who had quoted them a price on the stock footage they were going to use for the film had doubled that price when the brothers went to buy it. Not once to allow this blatant tomfoolery, the brothers Ali immediately pulled out of the deal and decided instead they would make a horror movie, and they wanted McNaughton to direct it. So McNaughton left the meeting with a budget of $110,000 and no other real rules except make a horror film with some blood in it that we could sell to teenagers. McNaughton's first step was hiring on producer Stephen A. Jones, who in turn brought on writer Richard Fire from Chicago's Organic Theater Company. Mr. Fire then pulled fellow Chicago Organic Theater members Tom Towles and Tracy Arnold. Towles would play Otis, an obvious take on Otis Toole, just with a less stupid name, and Tracy Arnold would play Becky, Otis's little sister and roommate. It should be noted that Becky in the film is taken from Otis's real-life niece, who lived with Lucas and Toole for some years in real life and was only 12 years old. In real life, it was widely believed that Lucas murdered Becky in 1982. That is, until she turned up alive in October of 1995, but we'll get to that. Fun fact, Tracy Arnold, who played Becky in the film, was very familiar with both Lucas and Becky because she was from Georgetown, Texas, where Henry Lee Lucas was tried. With an Otis and Becky in place, all they needed now was their Henry Lee Lucas, aka Henry. Luckily, the special makeup effects artist knew a guy. That guy? None other than Michael, I'm Mary Poppins, y'all, Rooker, who you may know from every film James Gunn has ever directed, especially as Yondu of Guardians of the Galaxy, or Merle of The Walking Dead fame, or, if you knew him at the time, Michael Rooker of the janitorial staff. In fact, when he showed up to the audition, he didn't have time to change from work, so he showed up in his janitor's outfit. When director John McNaughton saw him, he said to himself, quote, "Oh, please, God, may he be able to act, because physically, this guy is perfect," end quote. And act he could. So, with a ragtag cast and crew of mostly first-timers, the production of Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, took to the mean streets of Chicago, Illinois, and made one of the most disturbing films of all time. Tom Tolles even went so far as to make a dentist friend make him a set of fake teeth for the role. But back in the real world, there was something brewing. And just what that something was, well, it'll have to wait for next episode. I know, I'm sorry, but this is another two-parter. I tried to fit it all in one, but it just wasn't happening. So, for the thrilling conclusion of the tale of one of the world's most seemingly prolific serial killers and the movie that his crimes inspired, tune in next time. Same bat time, same bat channel. And just to be extra clear, the bat time is the first and the third Tuesday of every month, and the bat channel is wherever you listen to podcasts. And with that, friends, I present you with one final fun fact. I will miss you. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Band Media Podcast. Oh, there goes that music again. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Band Media Podcast. Email us at bandmediapodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Ronnie Ursenbach. And please like, comment, subscribe. And if you donate blood, come join our Band Media Podcast team on the Red Cross app. And if you don't donate blood, then think about starting and then do the thing I just said. Well, that's enough of my rambling for now, but keep being wonderful, dear listeners. Adios.